Thank you everyone for being here. I look forward to getting our first discussion going. And today on Inside and Out, the new series, we will be talking about, different health practices, kind of invisible processes that maintain and manage our bodily processes, psyche, everything that could be going into our well-being and stresses. Today specifically, we have Dr. Stephanie Barbakoff here with us from Oculus Brain Centers. She and I were co-workers back at ImagineX Functional Neurology. She was one of the incredible doctors that just always triumphed in women's health, pregnancy, hormones, really the go-to person for any of those things that I would always send dear friends to, and really looking forward to having you here today. So it's nice to have an old friend with us. And I also know that typically when it comes to just support and discussion groups, there's usually a bit of guidelines. Thank you for starting us off on having everyone on mute, at least for Zoom etiquette. And then beyond that, I really wanted to talk about the intention that I hope for each of you to get out of the session today. And one of my coaches, who's also here with us, hi Michael, challenged me yesterday to ask what are 3 things someone can walk away, hopefully, from these sessions. And I thought that'd be a great way to kick us off. And I wanted to invite all of us to take these in and know that, we're all going to get something different out of this, hopefully all looking for a little bit of support. But mainly, I would like everyone to walk away and have in mind that we're here to think critically and creatively about our current environment and its effect on us and our effect on it in return. I'm hoping that everyone walks away with some support and genuine information that you can apply to your life now that can help you move forward in a more positive way, allowing us all to really take a step back and breathe during this time. And ultimately, I would love for these groups continuously to bring us a sense of camaraderie and presence. I think we all miss a little bit of gathering together right now, knowing that you're with a group this large, which is incredible, that you can fully show up and be yourself, and that we're all going to be here and appreciate you fully. So there's no silly questions, no silly comments. I'm really looking forward for this support group to bring that for all of you. And I think with that, I'll let Dr. B introduce herself and take us away.
Awesome. Well, hello. Thank you so much for having me, Rachel. This is so awesome. And just to give you guys a little bit of background on my relationship with Rachel, she mentioned we worked together, and she was always the big idea person for sure. So when she came to me and she was like, hey, I want to put this together and I want to create something, I was like, of course. You've been quarantined for
You muted yourself, Stephanie.
Sorry. Yes, Steph, you'll have to unmute yourself. I apologize. I muted everyone.
Okay, awesome. Perfect. So thank you for doing that for me. So she's always been the big idea person, so it wasn't shocking to me at all. So I'm super happy to be a part of this and to kick you guys off. First and foremost, we have a really good mix of people today from all over the country, which is amazing, coast to coast. I'm going to keep the message pretty simple because we're all at a little bit of different levels of understanding. So what we want to get out of today is basically what's going on with the stress response in the body, how it's affecting us, how to test for it, and then what to do about it. I'm going to give you some things from a professional perspective, and I'm also going to give you my opinion, what works for me, what I like to do personally, but none of this is going to substitute for medical advice. So know that any recommendations or any suggestions should be consulted with your general practitioner, your provider. So that being said, let me share with you my screen, and then you guys can see my slides. All right, how's that looking? We good? Cool. All right, so to start off here, I'll just give you a little bit of background about myself, what I do, and why the heck I'm the one talking to you today about the stress response and hormones. So I have a clinic in San Diego that we just opened last year. It's called Oculus Brain Centers. and we are doctors of the brain. My background is in chiropractic. After I got my doctorate in chiropractic, I took a deep dive into neurology, which was so cool, and answered all of my questions about the body and things that I couldn't explain. To me, the brain answered all my questions. So today we're going to speak about a brain-based perspective to hormones and what you can do to optimize the neurological function. So just to give you a good idea of the difference between medical neurology and functional neurology, I put together this nice little contrast here. So on the left, you'll have medical neurology. Basically, medical neurologists are looking for something black and white. They're looking for pathology, a disease process that's occurring. Things like a tumor, a stroke, or some sort of disease. A lot of the times, hard neurological conditions, Parkinson's, a lot of the times migraine headaches, neuropathy. Those kind of people walk into a medical neurologist's office and they're managed by a neurologist through the tools of drugs and surgery. And that's amazing for people that fit into a black and white world. My practice is a functional neurology practice, which means we're trying to optimize brain function. And we're looking for the subtleties, not just if you can do a certain task like balance or coordination, but how well you do it. So a lot of the times when we're looking at anything, today when we go through and we're looking at labs or we're looking at the parameters to have high or low cortisol, or if you have high hormones, low hormones, or even with cholesterol, not everything is so black and white. And so we look for these trends and these people that live in the gray area. That's my whole practice, is a bunch of people that are in the gray area and they've kind of fallen through the cracks. So our treatments are focused. They're all non-invasive and they're all customized to that person's nervous system. So it's basically like customized brain rehab that I get to do every single day, which is wonderful because these applications are different from person to person, just like your hormones are going to be different from person to person, your reaction to being isolated and quarantined and the effect that has on your body is going to be different from person to person. So keep that in mind as we're going through. And again, I'm just making generalities and suggestions, and take what works for you and leave the rest. So stress, I had to give you guys a definition because stress is so vague. What is stress? Any disturbance of anything, anywhere. It's psychological, it's chemical, it's physical. So it's really vague. As scientists, as doctors, we don't really like the word stress because we can't measure it. We can't touch it. We can't categorize it, right? Because it's so many different things. So it's a difficult concept. So today I'm going to talk about your hormones, and specifically we're going to talk a lot about cortisol because that's one way that we can measure your body's stress response. I always tell my patients that I can't take away your stress, but we can try to make you a little bit more resilient to stress. So today we're going to try to make you guys a little bit more resilient to stress. And for me, the way my brain works, I like to understand in order to take away any fear. When someone comes into my office and say they have vertigo or they have dizziness, the fear is that there's something really bad happening that's life-threatening or deadly, and that can be really scary. Same thing with hormonal fluctuations. It can feel like a loss of control. So when there's something that we can measure and I can give information to kind of clear up a lot of the mystery around what's going on with somebody, it gives a lot of validation to patients and people that are searching for an answer and have maybe been told that it's in their head or that they're making it up, which is all too common. I wish I heard that a lot less than I currently do in my practice. So the body stress response is comprised of 3 different areas. One is the hypothalamus, which is in the brain. Right next to that is the pituitary, which you've probably heard of. That's a really common one. And then your adrenal glands, which are 2 glands that sit on top of your kidneys. So it's a brain to adrenal axis. We call it the HPA axis. So I put in a little slide with pictures so you guys can kind of conceptualize that. And when we're talking about stress, the first response is a reflexive response. So basically the brain sends a signal right away down to the adrenals. And this whole process gets going without going to the neocortex, which is right in the front. That's what makes you human. It's the newest part of the brain that gives you your personality and your decision-making skills, your executive function. So it's really important. And without bringing that part of your brain into the picture and activating it, this stress response just happens and adrenaline just goes without conscious control over it. So you'll see that the adrenal glands send catecholamines. What catecholamines are is essentially adrenaline. It takes about 10 minutes or so to manufacture that cortisol that you need. So the initial response is going to be adrenaline, and then you'll start to produce cortisol. Everyone's probably heard of fight or flight. I know that Tiger King is super popular right now and everyone's talking about it. And so this would be the situation. Your sympathetic system would be triggered and you would either fight or flee from the Tiger King or the tiger. And so the opposite to the sympathetic system is the parasympathetic system. And that's the one that helps you rest and digest your food and go to sleep and calm down. It's also termed the feed and breed system because it also handles those things. So people that are in a fight or flight state, a sympathetic state all the time, I always use my mom as an example because she's so jumpy. She's such like a nervous Nelly, and everything triggers her stress response. So if you know somebody like that or you're like that, you probably have something going on with your HPA axis because you're chronically stressed. So we're going to talk a little bit about the stages of the stress response. The first one we talked about, that's the fight or flight, the alarm stage. Then there's the resistance stage. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about that today, where your body is producing hormones like DHEA and cortisol. More on that in a few minutes. And then the last stage, which you've heard of as like adrenal fatigue, where you've depleted your stress hormones and you're basically zapping other hormones or taking building blocks from somewhere else in order to create cortisol. But recently, we've kind of moved away from the term adrenal fatigue, and we now term it to the HPA axis, or hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis dysfunction, rather than just like a broken gland. It doesn't make sense for us to have this adrenal gland and then it just goes kaput and it doesn't do anything anymore. So we now know it's more of a signaling issue based on this feedback loop from the brain down to the adrenals. Now, cortisol is a regulating hormone. So cortisol regulates a lot of different things. It regulates your sleep-wake cycle, your stress, of course, but also your immune system. So this is when people talk about if you're stressed out all the time, it creates inflammation and it can compromise your immune system. So even though we're in a pandemic, you have to be stressed out, but don't be too stressed out because then you'll be inflamed and then you could get COVID-19, right? So it's this feedback loop. So we're going to talk a little bit about the immune side today, but the most important thing you want to gain from this slide is that cortisol is produced from cholesterol. That is huge because I'm not going to give you a diet that I recommend. I recommend tons. But this just means that you need good fats to create cholesterol, and you need cholesterol to create your hormones. So if you run a hormone test and your hormones are all out of whack, don't be surprised if I ask you about your fat intake, because if you don't give yourself the building blocks to make your hormones, of course you're going to have hormonal dysregulation. So diet is going to be an important tool that we use in order to regulate our hormones. And that might be a trigger for some people out there. I know my diet has been not great in quarantine, so I hope someone else out there is with me on that, and we can just support each other and not make each other feel too bad about it and just go with grace. All right, nothing more on this slide. So After this slide, we're going to take a tiny little break, just have a discussion, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of a background on the brain's influence on the hormones and what's going on neurologically. There's a really important, very tiny part of your brain called the amygdala that I think it means almond in some old language, but it's part of the brain in the temporal lobe, which is on the sides, pretty deep inside, located at the end of the hippocampus, which is where your memory centers are. And it's part of the limbic system, which is your emotional regularity. And so again, if you're unable to regulate kind of your emotional side, then that can influence your hormones. So always think of my mom. She's stressed all the time, super emotional. And so these systems get very intimately tied together. Now, this part of the brain has a huge influence on the HPA axis. And so there's lots of studies that show that childhood trauma can actually influence this regulation of the HPA axis. And so my head and my heart go out to all the little ones that are going through this crisis and have this trauma. And so the best thing that we can do is try to create routine and decrease the stress in their lives in order to prevent any future spiraling out of control. So the 3 or 4 things that are listed here, I think we can all say that we've experienced in some form or another. Decreased sensitivity to cortisol, that's going to be like not so great stress response. A lower CAR is the cortisol awakening response, basically feeling sluggish in the morning, can't get out of bed. We've all been there. And then obviously vigilance around fear and anxiety. And so obviously all of us deal with this in some form or another, some more than others, but anytime we're in a big trauma like this, we want to just consider things like nice self-talk and positivity and ways that we can de-stress. So in a few slides, we'll be talking about solutions, ways to de-stress. Again, we can't take it away, but we can make you more resilient to it. So I'm going to break. I want to hear from you. I want to hear your questions. Anything specific to you is fine to ask, but if it's too case specific, I'm going to just ask that you maybe message me privately. But I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear how you're doing in quarantine. What are some of your biggest stressors? Any hurdles that we can help you overcome? And then after the break, after this small breakout, what we'll do is I have some great data on the cortisol response, how we're going to test it. We'll have another small breakout, and then at the end, we'll go through solutions. How's that sound? All right, so let me stop sharing. I'm going to go back to gallery view so I can see you. Rachel, do you want to unmute and then take us through some discussion if you have any specific questions that people had submitted?
Yeah, let's see. So I think right now I'd like to just open it up to the room for starters, for anyone that has some questions about that, or if you don't have questions yet, I'd love to hear what everyone is doing right now to support themselves.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
How is cortisol impacted by irregular sleeping patterns, like not having baseline homeostasis? Like I noticed it was linked to like when you wake up. I'm wondering what the impact is.
Great question. So we're going to talk about in the next section, you're totally like alley-ooping me here. We're going to talk about the cortisol awakening response, which is what's supposed to happen when you wake up. So when you wake up, you have this natural rhythm, kind of like if you've heard of your circadian rhythm, when you're supposed to wake up and you're supposed to go to sleep. And that people that work night shifts, they have a lot of HPA axis dysfunction because they are flipping their regular rhythm on its head. So you should have this beautiful cortisol pattern that goes throughout the day, but as you start to slip out of your natural pattern, you can have high cortisol when you're supposed to have low, or vice versa, low cortisol when you're supposed to have high. And that has tons of effects on your body. just to name a few symptoms. I mean, lethargy, you're looking more towards caffeine and stimulators, you're wound up at the end of the night, you have to rely on a lot of other things to get by. Some people go to sugar, some people look towards other substances for compensation. It has emotional effects, right? So that's where we start to see stress and depression and anxiety all kind of rolled into one. So that's in short, I think, what I'm seeing, at least in practice. And in the next section, I'll explain that a little bit more in detail and why it's so important to have this rhythm. And then at the end, I have some really great solutions about sleep hygiene, things that you can do to kind of take back that pattern and reestablish it if you've lost it, which, let's be honest, most of us have lost it, right? Any other questions?
Or what are people struggling with at this time? They find they're not able to do in their regular that they would normally.
I think that a piece of it, and some others of you may resonate, is that we're all working from home at this point. And for me, there's not much of a separation because I have to work in my bedroom. So often I walk, the 2 feet to my desk, or even worse, open my laptop directly in bed. And obviously that has some impact on all the processes we just reviewed, and just wondering, obviously there's tactics like do another activity first, and sometimes unfortunately it's not possible. So any thoughts around that would be really awesome. But understanding it's kind of a two-factor concern of mine.
Yeah, so some really simple things you can do is keep your routine as much as possible. So you don't necessarily have to put a bra on or put makeup on, but get up in the morning and go through your regular routine, right? Do the steps that you normally do in getting ready for work, except you don't actually go anywhere. One very helpful tip I was on another group recently, hi Margot, we were on an autoimmunity aware support group, and someone was saying that separating the space, like from their living space, if you're maybe in telemedicine, you log on to a computer, having your workstation not be where you're living, like not be on your couch, but maybe you create a little station where that's where you go to work. So something like that might help to separate it in your mind, separate the space, and just try to keep as much of your routine as possible. So don't, wear sweatpants every day. Maybe one day actually put jeans on, just see if they fit still.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I've worn jeans one time since I left work in March. So that's a real thing. And yeah, Madeline, I would add to that to say something that has really, truly helped me is waking up and doing something for myself right away. Just something I want to do. Like I'm waking up, early enough. We don't have to commute anymore. So just do something you want to do first thing in the morning. And it really sets the whole day up for better productivity because you get that sense of accomplishment that you've already done what you wanted to do that day. It's not like people are taking away that feeling of people are taking away your time, or work's taking something away, or, feeling that we even need to be perfect or have any sort of agenda. It's kind of nice to just wake up. And for me, who likes to sleep in quite a bit, my dad, who's here, will attest to that as well. And he's laughing in the corner, I can see. It really helps me wake up in the morning, like just knowing that I can get up and do something that I want to do. So I would encourage everyone to do that tomorrow.
We'll talk a little bit about, at the end, meditation, if anyone's looking for a way to do that, to incorporate even just a 5-minute practice. For me, meditation was like a huge trigger word. I'm from New York, and so when you say meditation, you're like, yeah, like that West Coast stuff, like, that doesn't work. And then I've really come to understand the benefits of it on the brain and the body, and it takes like 2 minutes of, I wouldn't even call it meditation, but just being peaceful. and just practicing being at peace, whether you do that when you're still or do a moving meditation, where a lot of people kind of have that, they get that same effect out of exercise. Some people do moving meditation and they're just at peace when they're exercising. So we'll talk a little bit about solutions at the end. But one more round, if there's anyone that wants to share even how they're feeling. If anything that I was explaining resonated, you can share that and just give me a little shout and say, hey, I hear ya. But if not, I'll jump into the next section. We'll talk about the cortisol awakening response. And
I have something to add.
Sure. Hi.
Okay. Hi, I'm Rachel. I didn't know exactly how I was supposed to chime in.
Chime in.
Okay. So I work from home always. I've worked from home for years now. And so developing, you know, a system that works for me being at home all the time and also being productive and integrating into my house, you know, I've had to set up a few things where I walk through the patio to get from my office to the other office rather than going through my kitchen, or, you know, finding little ways that I can be productive. And what I found over the years is that I have the flexibility. Being an entrepreneur, I work at midnight, I work at 6 a.m, I take the day off, or I sleep in and then I work through the day. You know, my schedule is always changing based on kind of the ebb and flow of my work and what I have to do. And I think, to me, this slowing down process and this process of working from home and having you know, I mean, some people have set schedules still, but there is a little more flexibility, right? So if you can, you know, go out for a walk, or if you can sit in your yard or on your balcony or something and read a book or meditate. I was like you know, I'd be in the shower. Is this meditating? I like multitask my meditating, you know. Until I made it to India, where it was 3 weeks of like 12 hours of meditating, different cycles of meditation, to where my nervous system actually felt it. And I went, oh, that's what they mean, you know? So I do encourage, like you said, people to kind of dip their toe in if they haven't already and take it to the next level, because there really is something to be said for that. And my last thing is, this is our lives that we get to orchestrate. And I think our society, you know, where I grew up in the United States is, you know, it's from when you're little all the way through. There's, you know, there's programs and there's something to do. And now they're worried that the kids are going to fall behind, and they're seeing that they're not falling behind. They're actually learning in a different way. So I think we too can allow our nervous systems to settle in and start to learn in a different way and observe in a different way. So thank you. Thanks.
I love that. I really, really love that so much, that this is our opportunity. And, you know, we all work differently, and some of us work with like to-do lists and tasks that we want to accomplish. But for some people, quarantine is like the break that they've always needed, but were never bold enough to take for themselves. And, you know, for some people like Rachel, she's like, I need a project. Let's create, let's make this program. And of course I'm right there with her, but you know, it's different for everyone. And we don't want to compare, and we just want to just be graceful and do what you can and create the life that you're looking for. And obviously these aren't ideal circumstances, but we
see it as an opportunity, you know? Yeah.
I love it.
All right. Thanks.
Of course.
Can you talk a bit about not wanting to get up in the morning?
Yep. I'm going to jump right into that now. We're going to talk a lot about not wanting to get up in the morning and why there might be an underlying reason that you don't want to get up in the morning. And so when we test for it and we can maybe show you what's happening in the morning right when you wake up, it can be really validating, because then it's not your fault. So let me pull up my slides again and we'll go ahead with that. Cool. So now we're going to talk about the cortisol awakening response. This is basically a mini stress test for your adrenals. As a review, the adrenal glands sit on top of your kidneys like a little hat, and they're so important, and they really don't get the credit that they really deserve. But this is the gland that pumps out cortisol. Cortisol is the most important thing from an evolutionary perspective because it's going to drive your stress response. And so it keeps us alive. It's a survival mechanism. Your body will produce cortisol in expense of any other building block. So if you have sex hormones available, but you don't have the building blocks for cortisol, your body's going to take your sex hormones and convert that into cortisol for survival, because who cares about sex hormones if you can't fight or flee from the tiger, right? And so cortisol, the way that your rhythm works, and this is going to tie back into the people that were asking about sleep and about waking up in the morning. When you open your eyes in the morning, your cortisol levels begin to spike. 30 minutes after you wake up, they should be sharply increasing, and they'll be peaking around 60 minutes after you wake up. So this rhythm, this spike, is what you should have in the morning. If you don't have it, if you have a kind of a lower response or a blunted response, we're going to talk about that, the things that can cause it, but that's for sure one of the things that's going to make you feel like you don't want to get up in the morning, that you want to sleep in, you want to snooze your alarm clock, and all of those things are going to affect you. So at the end, as promised, I'll give you those sleep hygiene techniques that are going to help to kind of make your cortisol spike first thing in the morning. Measuring this rise and fall is the stress test that, it's the closest thing to measuring stress, let's say that. And now after they peak at 60 minutes after waking, throughout the day, they're going to be slowly decreasing. If you don't have a nice sharp spike, then you're kind of flatlining throughout the day. And so you might just be fatigued throughout the entire day. There's also people that have that afternoon slump, need an extra cup of coffee in the afternoon, and they need an extra pick-me-up. That could be because your afternoon cortisol isn't where it should be. So this is a graph of where you should fall in between that nice pink shaded area. That's where you should be. So if you have a normal cortisol, you'll spike 30 to 60 minutes after waking, and then you're slowly decreasing down throughout the day. If you're low, you're going to be that green line there. That's pretty much a flatter line. You could also have an elevated cortisol response. Some people, it's not as common for me to see an exaggerated cortisol spike. These people are morning people. Do you know what I mean? Morning people that are just like chipper and they're so excited in the morning. These people usually have a very robust cortisol awakening response. They just have all of the building blocks to just sing and get through their day. I'm very envious of these people. But people that are in chronic pain typically don't have the proper response. Typically, I'll see they have an elevated response. If you're psychologically stressed out and you have anticipation, like anticipatory stress of the day, if you have a really hard job and you're kind of prolonging getting up because you're worrying about your day, that can also spike your cortisol a little bit too high in the morning, and then you can burn out in the afternoon. So things that can cause a low or blunted cortisol awakening response, underactive HPA axis, psychological burnout, some other ones, a traumatic brain injury. Let's tie this back into the neurology just for one moment. If you have a head injury, which is our specialty at Oculus Brain Centers, we see, I would say, more than half of our practice are traumatic brain injury patients. A lot of them have hormonal implications, and we address their cortisol response and other hormones, neurotransmitters as well, that are a consequence of their traumatic brain injury. Hormone regulation starts in the brain. Glands they're not smart. They don't just do what they're supposed to do. They have to be signaled by the brain in order to do that. So again, going back to when we talked about adrenal fatigue, it's not the adrenal gland's fault, it's the signaling from the brain and the feedback loop that is working against you. It's not the gland's fault. I say this about muscles as well. If someone says that they have really tight muscles, well, it's not your muscle's fault. What is your brain telling that area? Say it's in your shoulder. Why are your muscles so tight? Maybe you don't have a good representation of your shoulder in space. So maybe you're holding all of that tension for protection, for safety. But muscles and glands, they're all dumb, which is why I study the brain, because we want to go right to the source. So getting back to the low cortisol awakening response, so more of a flat curve, things like hypertension, low thyroid output, if you're taking medications like an opioid, if you have autoimmunity, typically those things will give a lower cortisol awakening response. Things that would cause the elevated response, an overactive HPA axis, caffeine use, hyperthyroid, acute infection, inflammation. The biggest one I see is glycemic dysregulation. So this would be someone who has blood sugar issues, not necessarily to the point of diabetes. I have tons of patients that come in that they have functional blood sugar issues, which means throughout the day there may be carb loading or they're not balancing their macros well, and so they spike and crash their blood sugar all the way through their day, which causes lots of inflammation. Your body hates it, and that can mess with your cortisol. So the testing that we do in our office, it's called Dutch testing, and it's a dried urine and saliva test. And so you'll see in the picture there the little tubes for saliva collection, and there's a couple strips that you urinate on. And this gives us everything that's listed on the slide, bunch of different hormones, cortisol, neurotransmitters, markers for B vitamin deficiency, B12, lots of things. This is the most comprehensive report I've ever seen. I tell you guys, I really nerd out on this stuff. They give you like a 16-page report. I love it. I love these reports. Okay, it's more information than any doctor needs, and it's fantastic because we can really individualize your protocol, your supplement protocol afterwards. So let me tell you why I do saliva and urine testing, because if you aren't familiar with hormone testing, you don't know why this is super special. It's special because if you just check saliva, that just gives you your free cortisol. It doesn't really give you the total picture, the big picture. It just gives you how much cortisol is basically floating around in your body. If you do just urine, you're getting basically your metabolized cortisol, which is the total output for your gland. So to put these two things together, it gives you the big picture. Some people, they do blood testing, and that's totally okay. But on the last slide, we just talked about that rhythm, and you're supposed to take the samples as soon as you wake up, 30 minutes after and 60 minutes after. And so if you had to get to a lab to go do a blood test, how are you going to wake up at the lab? You can't. And if you have to drive to the lab, and the stress of driving somewhere, even 5 to 10 minutes, that can mess with your cortisol as well. So I find the accuracy of having a home kit that you do on a normal day, and it kind of gets integrated into your routine to give me the most accurate results and the big picture. If I was to do a blood test, typically my patients aren't going back to the lab 2 and 3 times in the day. And so we only get one reading. And again, that doesn't show us the rhythm, because what if at the one time you take the sample, your cortisol levels are normal at that time? And then we say, oh, you're fine. These are the people that don't fit into the black and white, right? All right, so next slide. Just wanna make sure I'm not missing anything. Cool. Now we're gonna talk a little bit about solutions. Rachel, do you want to break for questions, or do you want me to give solutions and then we'll break?
And how about another opinion from the audience? I feel good about that. Does anyone want to unmute before we unshare?
I say solutions first.
All right,
Cool.
Let's do it. Let's finish it out. Sounds good. Thanks, Rachel.
Awesome. So I am a huge advocate for the root cause, finding the root cause. I try not to address symptoms. If you're tired, give you coffee or give you, just throw supplements at you. I try to figure out the reason why you can't get up in the morning, the reason why you have insomnia, the reason why you're jumpy, and every time, that loud noise happens, you're freaking out and you're always in fight or flight. I try to kind of get to the root cause, whether that's with a traumatic brain injury patient or with a functional medicine hormone patient. We treat it all the same. So getting to the root cause is important. That being said, I'm going to give you some really common ways to fix a couple problems that I see. One of them is low energy. All of us could stand to have a ton more energy and get a lot more done with our day, whether that's doing something enjoyable or something that we have to do. I'm pretty sure most of us would like some more energy, please. So here are some ways to get it. Supplements. I'm not going to give a specific recommendation for supplements. Again, I do everything case by case. And so if I work with someone, I get the whole picture, then I make any recommendations. So I don't want to just throw generalities at you. A lot of people throw money at supplements and they just have really expensive pee because they are just dabbling and they're kind of grasping at straws. And a lot of the times it's a waste of money, especially if you're buying your supplements on Amazon and they're not professional grade supplements, or Costco. Never buy supplements at Costco. One of the things that can help if you have a low or kind of blunted or stunted cortisol awakening response is licorice root. Licorice root is available over the counter. It is, the mechanism of it is it inhibits or stops the breakdown of cortisol. So it can help that afternoon slump. If your cortisol is kind of crashing a little bit too fast in the afternoon, this can slow that decline. It's fantastic. However, licorice root, like many other things, have side effects. Licorice root cannot be used if you have hypertension. So if you have any cardiovascular issues or high blood pressure, you want to consult your doctor, find another way around, but licorice root is not going to work for you. Blood sugar regulation is one of them. Cut your carbs, cut out processed foods and any added sugars. Even here, I'm drinking some fresh squeezed orange juice, but I water it down. I put a little bit of LaCroix or water in it, so I'm not getting as much sugar. But blood sugar regulation all comes down to building a fire. I'm gonna admit that I was a Girl Scout for far too long, and so I learned how to build a fire. Blood sugar regulation is about building a fire. You need the kindling, you need the dried leaves and little sticks and pieces of wood in order to get the fire going, for sure, but those just burn up, they burn hot, and then they burn out. So that's gonna spike your blood sugar and have it crash, and that's gonna be cheap carbs, sugar, candy, bread, muffins, all the delicious things that we're all eating too much of during quarantine that we shouldn't. So we want to move towards those big logs that we put on the fire and they burn slow and steady over time. That's going to be your proteins and healthy fats. Think of my analogy is always trail mix. Trail mix is fantastic because you can have those little bits of candy and dried fruit because you get so much protein and fat from the nuts that are in trail mix that it slows the spike of sugar. So that's a good way to regulate your blood sugar, is adding in proteins and fats in place of cheap carbohydrates. Changes in diet are so obvious. Whole food nutrition is going to be something that's going to give you the building blocks to make energy, to make ATP, to make hormones. So getting rid of any processed foods, it's like step one. Typically in our practice, we don't start with someone unless they've already taken a couple of these steps and removed several things from their diet, just because it's so foundational to health and decreasing inflammation. We have to start there. Exercise is a great way to improve energy. That's something that's going to spike your cortisol just slightly, depending on the type of exercise you do, if it's pretty rigorous. And so I like to have people exercise first thing in the morning or in the afternoon, again, with that little afternoon slump. If you need a cup of coffee, try to switch it, drink lots of water, and do a workout instead of having a cup of coffee. And that will give you that little boost of cortisol that you're looking for. De-stress, how are we going to do that? Next slide, I will answer that for you. And then the last one is improved sleep hygiene, which I have an entire slide on. And so we'll go through that in a moment. Ways to de-stress. So we already talked about meditation. The best apps out there are the ones that are individualized and customized to you. And so I like Calm. There's also one that's called Stop, Breathe, and Think. And what that one does is it has a little mental and physical check-in. And so it's going to ask you the way you're feeling. And based on your answers and your emotions that you put in, you're going to get a customized meditation. So if I was upset and angry, I probably wouldn't want to do a falling asleep meditation. I'd want to deal with whatever was going on internally. So I like the fact that they have customized meditations for you. Again, starting with 5 minutes or less once a day is totally fine. I'm willing to meet you where you're at. And again, it's about peace. I also added in some brain-based ways to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. As a review, the sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight. Parasympathetic is going to be the rest and digest, also called the feed and breathe system. And things that activate the system are things like vigorous gargling. It sounds so silly, but put a little bit of water in your mouth in the shower and gargle as loud as you possibly can, top of your lung status, really wake the neighbors. That's something that's really good in activating the vagal nerve or the vagus nerve, and that's part of your parasympathetic system. Cold showers also is another good way. Gargling also goes along with humming, activating the muscles in the back of your throat by humming and gargling, both vagal nerve activators. Deep breathing, box breathing, where you're breathing in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. There's also 4-7-8 breathing, in for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. There's so many different ones depending on what's going on with you, but just paying attention to your breath activates what's called interoception, your perception of what's going on inside your body. So that's pretty cool. Also physical movement. And again, take what works for you. If exercise and physical movement is a trigger and not a way to de-stress, then just put earmuffs on, pretend I never said it. I think this is my last slide for solutions, and then I'll take questions. Ways to regulate your circadian rhythm. So this is for my 2 lovers who were talking about sleeping and waking and how do we fix that. This is the way to reset your circadian rhythm. So sleep hygiene goes like this. You go to sleep in the darkest room that you can never find. Close all of the blinds, like blackout blinds, blackout curtains, no light. Put your phone somewhere else in another room so you don't hear vibrating or the lights going on in the middle of the night. Cover up any little gadgets or gizmos you have around your room that are going to light up. You want to wake up in the morning to an alarm or with the sun if you're in the position that you can do that. And no snoozing your alarm, because what that does is it puts you back to sleep, and then your cortisol rhythm is going to get all messed up because when you woke up, your cortisol starts to climb, but now you're going back to sleep. But then you're going to wake up again, but then you're going to go back to sleep. So you're messing with your rhythm here. And the first thing you should do when you wake up, jump out of bed even if you don't want to, and open up the blinds and let sunshine in, because light is going to drive this cortisol response. It's not going to be fun at first, and you're really not going to want to, but this is the way you reset your circadian rhythm. So it's a practice. It's not a perfect, so you need to keep it going. The last thing you can do with going to bed at night on time is cut out screen time at least 1 hour, ideally 2 hours before going to bed. This way you're not driving your brain. It's specifically your midbrain where your fight or flight system lives. And you want to stop stimulating that so your body can wind down, you go to sleep. That is about it for sleep hygiene. And let me go back to the view and I'll unmute you because I see some messages coming through. Yes, no snoozing is definitely going to be hard. But again, this goes back to keeping your regular patterns and your regular rhythm if possible. You can give yourself a little cushion so you can do it for more than 8 hours. You can give yourself 9 or 10 hours of time in bed, but just make sure you have a rhythm. So no sleeping until like 12 o'clock, and then the next day it's 1 o'clock, and just keep it consistent. Cool. Rachel, why don't you take us into a discussion or questions?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all of that too. I know for everyone here, for some people, it might be something you're experiencing. For others, maybe just interesting to learn. I know I fall a little bit into that boat of actually enjoying all the extra time that we seem to be having right now. I think similar to what Rachel was saying earlier, I never gave myself permission to unplug before, and it's just kind of forced for us right now. So I'm personally enjoying that. And I've tried some of the solutions you suggested, but definitely a nice reminder for some of them. And then new ones, I'll have to try the gargle thing. I don't think I've done that. So that is great. I would love to hear too, it's great to ask questions, but I also want to make sure people are here getting support on things that they feel are stressing them out, to some degree, but allowing space for people to just talk and share as well. So even if you just have a comment, feel free to come off mute, because someone else is probably feeling the same way as you. And I'd love to open up the discussion. So I have a couple questions in mind, but I would like to hear from the audience first.
Yeah, I can chime in. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, something I feel like I've been struggling with is that normally I kind of handle anxiety by planning. So like planning trips, or planning, what I'm going to do this weekend, or a happy hour, or even just kind of thinking of the future and kind of allowing that to cheer me up. And so I think what's been so hard about this time is just the uncertainty of when will we return to normal. And it's really hard to plan when you don't know what next week or the next month will look like. And so I've been trying to kind of plan little things and day by day, but I'm someone who struggles to stay in the present quite a bit. So I think that's been the hardest part for me, is just kind of the unknown that lays ahead.
I'd love for someone else, maybe in the audience, to riff off of that. I think that's an amazing share. I don't want to stand on a podium and act like I have all of the answers. So I'm wondering if anyone else out there is also struggling with that and wants to do more to de-stress, and what you're currently doing to cope with that.
I can do that. I wake up in the morning and I'm good as long as I'm in bed. When I get out of bed, the stress hits immediately. And I don't even go to work. I don't work in a workplace anymore. There's nothing in reality for me to be stressed about within my immediate environment. So it's just like a switch turns on and it goes up. One of the ways that I have figured out that I can deal with that is, you talked about doing something that you like. I do art now. I'm a watercolorist, and I paint every day. And a lot of it I've been teaching myself. What I find when I'm doing the art is that everything calms down. My blood pressure goes down. It's sort of a form of meditation, because I'm just really, really focused on creating. And that has been really, really helpful. It's my place where my zone that I can go to.
I love that.
I'd
Awesome.
love to spin off of that, actually, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
So I actually have several autoimmune diseases, and I've had a lot of different instances where I felt very defeated and overwhelmed, feeling like I have no control over my body. And I think it kind of relates to the situation right now where there's that lack of control and comfort. I know for me personally, it's been really helpful to make a daily routine, kind of like what Stephanie was saying, and also to not really focus on when the pandemic will end or anything like that, but to really focus on the present and learning, this is
the now, like this is our current situation, and living in this moment, and kind of changing our mindset to, instead of maybe planning the future, just enjoying the present. And so for me, I know getting out walking for even just like 10 minutes in the morning helps clear my head before starting the day and gets me a little bit more energized. And when I feel stressed, I just kind of, pause for a minute, maybe write down a few things that you're grateful for, and just really like soak in the day in that moment and what we do have, not what we don't have.
Yeah, so reframing it, that's awesome too.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I love that like that perspective is just so helpful, because I kind of like to think of it as like when the lights go off because of a thunderstorm or something, you have to use candles. It's like super inconvenient, and your food might go bad in the fridge, and there are a lot of negatives to it, but like there's some good things that you can take from it, and just remember that your life is still happening right now, even if you're waiting, for things to kind of end. Because I'm used to like, I can definitely, I'm used to planning for the future a lot. I love travel, so I'm always have something new on the calendar, and I have nothing right now. And it's stressing me out a little bit, the uncertainty of when am I going to be able to like do those things. And I also wake up in the morning without, I'm totally fine. And the second I get out of bed, just like you said, Cynthia, like I am so stressed and I don't know where it comes from. And it's just like a heavy, tight chest, and it will not leave me alone. So some things that have helped me with that are, in the morning, I know that it's going to happen, or I'm anticipating it, which probably helps it happen. But I will not look at my phone, just make a point to not look at it right when I wake up. And instead, I'll journal in my bed or read a book to kind of just get my mind in like a different place, like even before I stand up. And then when I get up, I have like a cup of bone broth or tea, and I turn on my diffuser. So I diffuse like essential oils in the morning. And that seems to help a ton. Something about the scent, it's triggering something in me. I use like Young Living, it's called stress something. But other people I know like different scents, but I just particularly like that one. And that seems to help a lot. Just always learning things every day that help.
Michael, why don't you go now? I know you had messaged that you had something great to share, so go ahead.
So similar to the tail end of what Kelly was saying, I have a two-step process for dealing with anxiety. The first thing I do is make sure not to like fight against it or control it or change it, because that just really invites a second wave of anxiety about the anxiety. So I just kind of normalize things. And typically anxiety kind of exists either in the future or in the past about the future. And so I go to gratitude. And gratitude inherently puts us in the present. It's almost like easy for people to say, oh, be mindful, be present. It's like, but what do I focus on that is mindful and present? And gratitude is kind of like the space of being present. It's just like, that's the space that it creates. So normalize what's going on, and then just start focusing my attention on gratitude, which is just like a natural state of mindfulness.
I love that. That's really beautiful. And why mindfulness and why gratitude and why being present is important is because this is something that I struggle with personally. I try to set goals and do things to get me to a place, right? But if I'm always trying to get to another place or accomplish something in the future, then I'm not where I'm at right now. So gratitude helps to bring me back to what I've accomplished so far, where I am right now in this moment. So that's what kind of resonates for me. I always go back to that. If I'm looking into the future or to the past, I'm not where I am.
I can add something about gratitude. I found that, if I go outside and take a walk, for instance, I can see the cars going by on the road, or I can see, that there are cracks in the sidewalk. But I can also see if I can pick things that I wouldn't normally focus on and be grateful for them. Like, that tree is really, really green. You know, it's really pretty. And I can be grateful for that. And, you know, I can see a little child walking with their parent, and, you know, they're so cute, and I can be grateful for that sort of essence of love that's happening over there. You know, I can be driving to the grocery store and see the scenery that if I'm in my head, I wouldn't see and appreciate. But if I allow myself to experience gratitude, I can see that the scenery is just gorgeous. And it's those things that help me to be grateful and center.
I have a thought.
Sure.
Hey.
Hi.
Yeah, hi, Jessie.
I totally agree with everything everyone said so far. I've also found that I've gotten to a lot of points where I don't feel grateful and I don't feel like things are that pretty, and I'm frustrated and, you know, feeling pretty negative. And I've found that letting myself feel negative for a little while can also help. And there have been days where I stayed in bed all day, or a day where I got back in bed and I was like, okay, I could get up again, and I did it again. You know, it's like little building blocks of maybe improving a little at a time. And kind of the opposite approach where I have a situation where I don't have to have a routine. My work is kind of on my own schedule. It's spread out throughout the week. And so I've kind of taken the opposite and given myself space to not need a routine, and kind of started playing a little game where I do whatever I want as I want to do it. And it's like, if I want to eat dinner at 3 o'clock, I eat dinner at 3 o'clock and I see what happens. And if I want to go for another walk, even though I've gone for 3, or I don't want to go for any walk, I don't, and just kind of see. And I'm finding that there's this natural feedback where it's kind of leading me back to things that do feel good. You know, like the day I ate 10 Reese's peanut butter cups, I felt like crap. Didn't work that great. But it is kind of helping to give myself space to feel like shit, because some days it's really shitty out there.
I totally love that, Jessie. Thank you so much for sharing. It's the opposite of good vibes only, right? Like, it's okay to have bad vibes also. It's like, I'm just not about the whitewashing of emotion. Like, it's okay to have negative emotions when negative things happen. It's okay. We're all feeling it. Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think along that same line is, maybe if you can think about not labeling everything as good or bad or sad or whatever, just let it arise and be with it, and see how you feel with it, and what you learn from that, and it's amazing what will happen if we don't try to compartmentalize everything and always, say, well, I did this or I did that, and you're kind of shaming yourself. So anyway, I thought that was great, Jessie. Thanks.
I just had one thing to spit off of that. I think one thing that's been really hard for me, I work with a very small team, and it's really easy to feel when somebody's off or not having a good week, and it's easy to kind of get sucked into that. So just reminding one another that we're all feeling this at different waves, and understanding that it comes at different times and affects everybody differently. But reining in that kind of team and group support, no matter where or what stage everybody's in, has been really helpful for me. Just, kind of reaching out that hand, understanding maybe it's not the time to ping somebody for the 3rd time on that deadline. That, they're not having the best week.
I think definitely, I definitely want other people to chime in, but you guys have said so many good things. And one of our values at where we work is humanness. And I totally get that, Amy. It's like, sometimes I'm just like, okay, I know you need to get stuff done, but like, there's just a lot going on right now. And it feels like it's all piling up. And going back to kind of the gratitude thing too, I think what I've realized and tried to look at is, if you're really honest with yourself and look at, stealing this from Michael, but looking at the evidence of the stories that we tell ourselves, in hindsight, right? We always say hindsight's 2020. So like gratitude is almost that hindsight in the present, because I know if you walk away from a fight with, a loved one, or you just had a, crappy day at work or something like that. I don't know about you guys, but I feel crappy for a bit, but then afterwards there's usually some sort of epiphany or like thing I'm grateful for having gone through that. And if we can only just remember that before we go through the negative downward spiral, then essentially that's gratitude. So I think when something's bad, try to even punch the gun and just say like, well, this means I'm learning something, and what can I be grateful for? And I just want to remind everyone of that as well. And you're your own worst critic, so get out of your own head. Steph, I did have a question, if no one else says, a little bit on the stress bit as well, is just, we've talked a lot about solutions. We talked a little bit about what everyone's doing and like what stress is, but I think sometimes, and other people can chime into this too, but what is really the first signal of stress that we can identify in ourselves or loved ones to know that maybe they need help or support? And we'll start there.
So I think the first thing to recognize is that we're all stressed, and that's normal. Some of us are stressed more than others, but stress is a part of life. That's why we've evolved with these systems to deal with stress, right? Because stress happens. I mean, you walking through your apartment, walking through your house, walking around the block, that's stress on your body. You need to move muscles and pump blood, and these things happen. It's when you can't cope with the level of stress that's in your life that you should intervene and develop these practices to neutralize them. But we can never really get rid of stress. It's just kind of how you're handling your own level of stress, and helping someone recognize when something maybe is a source of stress in their life, but they don't see it, right? Like the toxic relationship, whether it's with a person or with a job. And so I think reflection is one thing that can help, helping someone reflect on their own life. And there's many ways that we can do that, whether it's through talking about it or different exercises. But I think the most important thing is just holding space for somebody and allowing them to realize the way that whatever that source of stress is impacting their life. Typically they know it. And someone, I forget who, was talking about our culture and our mentality, even just with kids. I mean, I have kids with adrenal issues because they're going from competition to competition, right? So it's just our culture to always be doing. And so just holding space for someone. And I always say you should be the lighthouse, right? It's not your job to go out and save all the ships that are crashing on the shore. Your job is to be the lighthouse and shine the light. And if people want your help, they'll come to you, but you can't force it upon anybody else. So just being the light and being the example and sharing tools to cope with stress and not try to change anyone against their will.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I do want to be conscious of everyone's time tonight. I understand that we all don't have anywhere to go, actually, so we can stay here as long as you want. But I would like to, keep the discussion going if anyone finds that helpful and has a few more questions, but I'd also like to be conscious of everyone's time and evenings. I wanted to share, close us out after that. So if there's any additional comments, feedback.
What's up, Rachel?
Hey, Ryan.
What's up, guys? So obviously there's like fear everywhere. So it makes sense that everyone's like experiencing anxiety and fear. And all this craziness, right? But if you're someone that like needs and like is mandated to be like kind of dependable, it's like almost like a requirement if you're like in any sort of leadership role to like remain calm, because calm is going to breed calm. So like Amy was saying, like you can tell like when someone's off because they're so stressed, and it'll throw everything else off in the process, you know? So like going into a situation like with a level of positivity, even though you know the situation may be just completely you know, like a really shitty situation for the most part, like having a level of positivity going into it is going to make it way better, you know, versus if you're already negative going in, it's obviously the outcomes aren't going to play in your favor, right? That's kind of something I deal with just like everyday stress. And I'm kind of more on the extreme side, as Rachel knows me pretty well, but I like strive to like look for it in the sense that like I want to find that obstacle because I know that's the way I have to go in order to crush it, you know, because if you get caught up in your head, you're just going to keep thinking about it, whether it be this virus or whatever the situation may be, right? So when you get caught up in your own head, you're just going to make the matters worse at that point, you know? So yeah, calm breeds calm, you know? And then for me, box breathing, honestly, you know, I work in a pretty interesting industry, and of all things, especially right now, it's pretty wild to say the least. So everything is insanely stressful, but kind of like what you were saying, Stephanie, about being the lighthouse, you can see it in everyone else's eyes that they're scared and they're experiencing anxiety. The last thing you need is basically you to experience the same thing. So again, I'm on the extreme side, so I don't wear a mask, I don't wear gloves, I still go out, I go to work every day. So my life actually hasn't changed as much, but everyone looking at me thinks I'm kind of crazy, which I may be, but it gives them a sense of calm because I don't seem to, you know, as long as you're not fazed by stuff, it translates to other people. But same with the adverse effects if you are constantly scared and experiencing anxiety as well. So, you know, it goes both ways. So just keep that in mind.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate that. I know a few people are starting to have to run, so I think I'll reel it in here a little bit. I wanted to leave everyone with just huge gratitude since we're practicing all of that now, hopefully. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, for showing up, for taking the time out of everything else that you could be doing, everything else that's stressing you out, just to talk about you and take some time for you. So I sincerely appreciate every single one of you being here tonight. I hope you found this insightful and you walked away with some creative and critical thinking, some support, and some sense of camaraderie through all of this. We will be hosting these every couple of weeks. I'll have kind of a different guest and topic each time. Thank you, Dr. B, for being here and sharing stress, hormones, and COVID with us tonight. And next time we tune in, it'll likely be we're still working on the agenda for next time, but I have one of my very dear friends who's a coach and inspirational leader as well, coming on to chat about, you know, being a powerful force from your communication, both internal and, since we're all just communicating virtually right now, like how to make sure our messages are getting clear and across. And we're going to be also diving into like talking about yourself a little more. So there's more to come on that. I am planning on sending everyone this recording as well as a thank you. So expect an email from me, and in that will be just a short survey. I'd love to get everyone's feedback on this so that I can come up with topics and invite guests on here that are going to talk about things that you're all interested in, that you want to learn. And also, just if there's ever a different format or something, I'm open to trying things, and I hope that we all start to shape this as well. I understand not everyone will be able to tune in to each of them. That time zones are a little different, so we might also play with the time. I'll ask you all about that then. And anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you, Dr. B, for leading us, and I'll leave you all with that.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice to meet everybody.
Nice to meet everyone too. I'll see you soon.